Good evening, everyone. My name is Lori Kaplan. I'm a SOCAN volunteer. I'm actually the chair of the SOCAN's Ashland contingent, but I'm here as a volunteer for SOCAN as one of the organizers for this program. Kathy and Alan invited me to introduce tonight's speakers, which we're super excited about. So welcome to our program entitled Bringing Social Equity to Climate Advocacy. So before we get started with our presenters, we are going to just go over a couple Zoom tips. That there's different ways that you can look at your screen. At the top upper right-hand corner, you should see something that says view that allows you to either just see the speaker or allows you to see everybody who is here participating in the program or just some people. So if you want to just see the speaker, that's an option for you to use speaker view. We will be using the chat function for our question period. So if you look on the bar at the bottom of your page, you should see a button that says chat, and you can go ahead and try that out. Say hi to your friends or whatever, but that's how you'll be asking your questions tonight. And my colleague Ellie Cosgrove is going to moderate our question period. And we're going to save those for the end of the presentations. And our speakers are going to be sharing their screen, and you can, again, you'll be able to select whether you want to see everybody, all the participants, or just the slides and the speaker. So sometimes it's easier just to be able to focus on the speaker. So that's an option for you. Please keep yourself muted now and throughout the program. And again, when you're ready for questions, that'll be done in the chat. So, and we are recording this program for future viewing. So I want to welcome everyone, all of our SOCAN volunteers. We're super excited about this program, and I'll be introducing our speakers in just a second. So the format is we're going to have about 35 minutes of presentation, followed by 10 or 15 minutes of questions, and then Kathy will rejoin us at the end to let you know about other upcoming SOCAN events and activities. Oh, there. Look at that, it's all right there. And I got it right. So that's what we're doing. So SOCAN, this program, we're super excited about this because we actually started to conceptualize this, the theme for this program last fall. And then, as you know, last fall was a very traumatic period for Southern Oregon with our fires. But the concept that we've been working on is to introduce a series of intermittent programs throughout this year around the theme of one planet, one team. And it's designed to investigate intersections between the science of climate change and activism and climate justice, while exploring the diverse perspectives of researchers, activists, and frontline and marginalized communities. These programs are intended to stimulate conversation and dialogue about how the science of climate change can be used to help understand and alleviate climate injustices here in Southern Oregon and throughout the state of Oregon. The sentiment is simple. We have one planet and we need to be a united team to save it. So we're really excited to introduce our speakers who we came across because we found out that Oregon had just come up with something called the State of Oregon Climate Blueprint, and they engaged Better World Group and Estolano advisors. The Oregon Health Authority did, in partnership with Oregon Department of Forestry and Department of Land Conservation, to lead interagency staff through a series of trainings and workshops to develop a climate equity blueprint. And it's designed as a high-level critical thinking tool to help state agencies center equity at the forefront of their climate adaptation work, not as an afterthought. So it's super exciting that the authors of this really important report are here with us to kick off this series. Cecilia Estolano is CEO and founder of Estolano Advisors. Estolano Advisors is an award-winning urban planning and public policy firm working with public agencies, nonprofits, philanthropies, and businesses to craft innovative solutions to address complex problems. Cecilia herself is a leading expert on contemporary urban planning issues with experience in economic and workforce development, land use, environmental equity, and urban revitalization for cities and communities across the country. Asma Mahdi is Policy Director of Better World Group. She's an experienced environmental conservationist with particular expertise in managing coastal resources and faith-based environmental justice and communications. Please join me in welcoming Asma and Cecilia to lead our discussion for tonight. Thank you, ladies, for joining us.
Thanks, Lori. Friends, we're going to have Asma start out. We have a brief presentation, but we really are excited about meeting all of you and having a chance to have a dialogue with you. So I'm going to turn it over to Asma, who's going to start us out with a PowerPoint. And I'm going to join in at the end, and then we're going to have a party and talk to all of you.
Great. Thank you so much, Cecilia, and welcome everyone. Thank you again to the SOCAN folks for organizing this. I'm coming to you from Los Angeles, which is also the land of the Tonga people. And so I just wanted to take a moment to recognize that I do sit on occupied land of the Tonga. And so what I'm going to do right now is, and hopefully I'm able to do this correctly, is share my screen. And put this in presenter mode. Are folks able to see my screen? No, okay.
Nope, it just came up, Asma.
It came up, okay. There's just a little bit of a lag there.
Yeah.
All right. All right, well, we're here to talk about the Oregon Climate Equity Blueprint and Toolkit. So a little context setting for the Climate Equity Blueprint and Toolkit. In 2019, the state of Oregon started to look at to update their 2010 climate change adaptation framework. And as part of that update, climate equity was really it was an important part that the state recognized that they needed to include that as part of this climate change adaptation framework that they were putting together. So the framework has 5 elements. The 5th element is the climate equity blueprint and the toolkit. Through the process that we did with all the state agencies, one really wonderful outcome of this process was state agencies recognizing the importance of climate equity, not just being an appendix to this climate change adaptation framework, but actually making sure that equity is woven throughout the framework. So yeah, in 2020, we started to develop the framework, and the hope is that this is going to be a living document for state agencies to continuously refer back to look at, and to update as their best practices change and shift over time, in the way that they're working with communities and working with both rural communities, communities of color, help inform and better this blueprint. So this is definitely a foundation that we put together with state agencies. So I want to walk through the timeline of how this came together. So as I mentioned, in the fall of 2019, the update to the climate change adaptation framework was announced. Around the same time, the climate equity working group was formed. And as part of that working group, they recognized that, putting together a climate equity blueprint, it was going to take a little more of a concerted effort. They put out an RFP, and that's where we came on board. And we won the contract, and were contracted with, as Lori mentioned, it was funded through the Oregon Health Authority and the Oregon Department of Forestry. The overall effort was led by the Department of Land and Conservation and Development. So we were working with the 3 organizations together to put this, to really shape the blueprint. And then our first meeting actually happened in March of 2020. So we were awarded the contract in February 2020. In March of 2020, we were starting to kick off, our meetings to design this project. And as we all know now, 2020 was it was a turning point year for all of us, and we had COVID. And so the project, which was originally supposed to only take 2 workshops in Oregon, and then have us come back, take all the input and information and turn that into a blueprint and a toolkit, ended up turning into a much more transformative, engaged process. And in a way, this was a wonderful outcome. So what we did, given travel restrictions and COVID-19, is we had to split this up into 2 segments. The first was doing a set of level setting workshops with the state of Oregon, with various state agencies, both agencies that were involved with the climate change adaptation framework and that were in the climate change, the climate equity working group. And so we worked with doing those first set of level setting workshops, getting everybody on the same page, have an understanding of what equity is, what do we mean by climate equity? How has the state of Oregon addressed this? What have been policies that have suppressed communities of color, rural communities in the past? And what are ways that we really need to think about investments in uplifting some of those, and not some of those, but uplifting those communities? So we did a first set of level setting workshops, and then after that, during the summer, we worked with the climate equity work group and did a series of specific workshops aimed at developing this blueprint and toolkit. So this is a real co-creation project. This isn't just consultants coming in and saying this is what you should be doing, but we really wanted this to be developed in partnership with both state agencies, but also with review and input from various community members and people outside. So after we did put the blueprint and toolkit together, it went into a public process for public comment. In the fall of 2020, we handed that over to Oregon Health, the Oregon Health Authority, and the Department of Forestry, and that went into a public comment process. That was a tongue twister for me. And then once it went into that public comment process, we had earlier this year, the climate change adaptation framework and the equity blueprint were released after all the input and feedback was put into that. So I put this image on here because when we were doing the climate equity blueprint work, I already mentioned one significant event that happened, which was COVID-19. The other significant event that happened was George Floyd. And when we had launched our level setting workshops, the first workshop happened on May 21st. George Floyd happened on May 25th, and then the second workshop happened on May 28th. So racial justice, climate justice was really like up top. Justice was really up top in everyone's mind. When we went into our series of doing the climate equity subgroup workshops, Portland saw a surge, and the state of Oregon saw a surge in protest in support of racial justice and support of Black lives. So it was a very important moment to be working on this, and so front of mind. And really for Oregon to have thought of this before we saw these social justice uprisings. And so, just wanted to also ground us in, as we were developing this, there was just so much happening in the world at that time. So why equity and not equality? I wanted to just, take a moment to explain the difference between equality and equity. So as on this slide here, I found an image where there are 3 kids that are watching a soccer game going on. On the left side, you'll see you'll see what we call equality, where every child is resourced the same. So they all have the same amount of boxes to be able to try to access and look at what's going on. And the reality of this picture is that because they're at different sizes, they need different resources to be able to see what's happening. So that's what equity is. Equity is thinking about the investments, the resources, the needs that various people have in order to have the same outcome. So what equity does is, on the right side, we see that, the shorter you are, maybe you need a little more support in order to be able to see what somebody who's 6 feet tall is able to see. So it's thinking about what are the needs and what are the resources for individuals, so that we're all thriving at that same level. And then I wanted to go into the design of the blueprint. So with the blueprint, we focused on four key pieces within the toolkit. So we wanted to touch on, how do state agencies build internal capacity? How do you embed equity into design? How are state agencies going to be able to, or how do state agencies support leading meaningful community engagement? And how do they improve data collection and use? Now, similar to, individual journeys when it comes to equity, racial justice, climate justice, everyone is in a different place. And so recognizing it's the same when you're even thinking about institutions and agencies separately. So some state agencies are very advanced in already incorporating equity into the work that they do. So an example of this would be Oregon Health Authority. And part of that is because people are at the center of public health. And so they are very people-centered in thinking about how is climate impacting different populations. And then there's some organizations where the people are understanding the connection and importance to centering and bringing in people into the conversation and how they are impacting or impacted by climate. So this is really to help, no matter where agencies are in their journey, to help them build that capacity across the board. The blueprint also intends to guide programmatic staff across the state of Oregon in incorporating equity into their policies, their programs, and their plans. Some of the big highlights of this blueprint are there are 4 categories under each of these tools, and within, under each tool we pose a set of guiding questions for state agencies to ask themselves as they're thinking about, how are we going to design this policy. If we're doing community engagement, how are we engaging the community and co-creating some of these policies and programs, and not just bringing a policy and program to a community and asking them to go forth and do something, but really thinking about how to integrate communities into the process itself. We provided case studies both in Oregon and here in California. We gave case studies on what has been successful and what has worked within government agencies at the state level and what can be duplicated or enhanced. And we also provided a set of resources in part of the, both part of the tools and as part of the appendix of resources that can be continued to be updated, but folks can use and reference back into. So now I'm going to turn it over to Cecilia to bring us home and talk more about climate vulnerable communities and the importance of equity in this moment.
Okay, so I think we're going to switch slides now. So there's been some great questions in the chat box about trying to form coalitions between traditional rural communities throughout America and EJ communities. Talk about how do you apply these principles to affordable housing folks who lost their homes in the Almeda fire, which was devastating. Saw some of the images from that. How does SOCAN, a science-based education organization, be most effective in embedding its work? So I dropped the link to the blueprint in the chat box because it's not very long, it's 36 pages, but a lot of it is just really posing questions, providing some examples, and giving you some principles. So why does this matter? The reason it matters is because we're really at a crisis every time, and you guys are a science-based organization, so you know what I mean. It's much worse than even people anticipated in terms of the accelerating impacts of climate change. So we have to build a movement that's enduring and strong as fast as we can. And that means we need to build a movement that cuts across geography, it cuts across race, ethnicity, it has to cut across what we think of as our traditional allies. We need to actually link arms if we're going to rebuild the economy in a way that's clean and also lifts everybody up. So it's critical that we confront this now and that we use things like science and data in a way to highlight the commonalities that we share, but also the disparate impacts. It is true that some communities are suffering more than others as a result of climate change, but we're all suffering. So if we can find some common values around creating a future that's worthy of our descendants, then we can actually link arms around transforming the economy from a petroleum-based economy to a clean energy economy. And at the same time, taking some of the values around equity, racial equity, environmental equity, and making sure that we embed those in a way that those economic circumstances and economic relationships are arranged so that workers get paid a decent living. Everybody has access to healthcare, safe and clean housing and affordable housing. Everybody has access to an education and an ability to actualize their great talents. So we look at this as really forward-looking on the part of Oregon state agencies in including this element as part of the climate plan, but it's a first step. And if you look at that link that we sent you, or we dropped in the chat box, this is really about a toolkit that's iterative. This doesn't have all the answers, but it gives you suggestions of the right questions to ask as you frame up policy, as you think about how you're going to use data, how you even collect data, how are you going to engage with communities, right? So it's a series of questions to help you think through that. So I guess the last thing that I'll say is we welcome the opportunity to talk to you about if you have specific questions, and we can get through some of the questions in the chat box. But the last thing I'll say is this. I've done a bunch of work in Oregon over the last probably now 3 or 4 years, and I've consistently been impressed by the sincere desire to do the right thing, not just in state agencies, but in communities all across the places that we've worked, and a willingness to look in the mirror and a willingness to look back at history. And that's critical. We cannot change the future unless we really understand how we've arrived at our present and the relationships that have caused us to be at odds with each other, right? So in the case of Oregon, really understanding the racial relationships, the racial impediments that have been placed and what that means, whether it's, essentially banning African Americans from the state or taking tribal lands away from Native tribes. What does that mean? The experience of farm workers in the state. Where does that put us in our relationships? And then how do we move forward, finding commonality, but confronting that, being honest about what's happened so that we can design policies and programs in a future that makes the world better for all of us, right? Not just for a few. The last thing I'll leave you with is, in our firm, we're all about trying to create this future worthy of our descendants, a future that is one that we're proud to say we contributed to building, a future where everybody feels cared for, everyone's taken care of, everyone has dignity. And in doing that, we have to seriously confront the economic relationships we have to each other and try to transform that as well. We come out of this as environmentalists, as folks that work on climate issues, but as we confront those issues, we know that embedded is this structure around economic relationships. So we never want to lose sight of that. We want to lift up the voices of workers, of working people, of those who have the least in our society. So I'll stop on that super global lefty frame and happy to answer any questions. I think we're going to have Ellie. Ellie, are you going to be kind of playing traffic cop on these questions?
Yes, I am. Yep.
Okay, take it away.
Yeah, so we have a couple questions in chat, and I know you did touch on it a little bit, but maybe you could elaborate a little bit on some of these questions. So that first question was about, how do you see a way forward to form a coalition between traditional rural communities throughout America and environmental justice communities that are already active? Because there can sometimes be a bit of a divide there. Is there a way to help both groups realize that their challenges are often more in sync than they realize? And I'd also like to just add, how as we as a nonprofit organization, what maybe can be our role in helping to bridge these divides?
All great questions. And I'll start, and maybe Asma, you can jump in as you need. So first of all, I think that even asking that question is just beautiful, right? Traditional rural communities are seeing their way of life changed by the accelerating transformation of our climate. And so we need to describe that. We need to document it. We need to say, this is real. This is not some theoretical thing. This is happening in real time now, and we can show the data to say how things are changing. We can also show how that is affecting us materially in our day-to-day lives, not to mention how it's affecting the landscape around us. And we can find common ground in that experience with what you want to talk about. Traditional EJ communities are experiencing the same thing. They just maybe experience it in a different way. And maybe they experience it in a more extreme way, but it's all linked to the same sort of feedstock of this economy, which is petroleum, right? And we can show a through line between our use of chemicals and petroleum and the energy that we create, coal, and what it's done to our community. So as part of it is data, history, and frankly, storytelling. We have to tell our stories and link up to the stories of others and find those commonalities. And I think when we are authentic about telling our stories and empathetic in the way that we speak about them and hear other stories, it creates that human link that builds a movement. So we talk about ourselves, then we stop and we listen. And we deeply listen and feel what communities who look really different from ours, that maybe in a very different physical environment, feel what they're feeling in the transformation and degradation of their own communities. And then we find that commonality. So I think where you have it. And then to answer your second part about what do nonprofits do, nonprofits can be truth tellers in a way that government agencies cannot, right? Sometimes you may find that somebody in a community quite different than yours that is speaking your truth through their words and their experience, they may be a more trusted ambassador or a more trusted emissary than a government agency, where now people really don't trust the government very much and worry about that being a legitimate source of information. So the fact that SOCAN is really based on data and science is really important. So to use that as an asset in telling your story, I will tell you that data actually never convinces anybody. What convinces somebody is the story you tell about the data, the narrative, and the meaning you ascribe to that data. That's what moves people. So to answer the question, tell your story, use the data, use the science that you all have at your command, and make those linkages through history, narrative, emotion, and compassion, and you can build a movement. Asma, what else do you want to add to that?
I think what I would add to that is, I mean, the movement building, I think about, we, in the 60s, we had a mass movement and for civil rights, and that could not have been done if you didn't have diverse coalitions, diverse people coming together. So it wasn't just one group of people standing up for civil rights. It was so many diverse, voices coming together. And I think that's what we need to do in this moment. We need to create that mass movement. And so to, Cecilia's point of like storytelling, I think people understand one another once they hear each other's stories, once they see those parallels and similarities. And that is really important in this moment. And there are so many parallels between, rural communities, EJ communities, and sort of the stripes, the economic stripes, the burdens that are being placed on them. And really bringing those communities together to build a mass movement, because it's not about, what is it that divides us? It's telling the stories of what it is that brings us together. And I think that's really, that's really important in this moment. Yeah. And I think we can go on to the next question.
Yes, thank you so much. That was really great. Yeah, so kind of thinking about these I'm thinking about stories now, and I know down here in Southern Oregon last September, we had the horribly devastating Almeda fire that ripped through 3 towns here and destroyed a crazy amount of homes. And so kind of looking at, I know that's really, it's on all of our minds in this community is, okay, we're cleaning up and then we're going to be rebuilding. So what ways, how can we integrate these principles that are discussed in the climate blueprint as we are talking about rebuilding our communities and working with all of these different organizations and people making decisions about how this rebuilding is going to take place? Yeah, maybe, I don't know if you have any examples of communities where they've had successes with integrating climate justice into these decisions. Yeah, so just kind of thinking about that specific example, if there's ways that we can really go about this keeping climate equity in mind, or if you have examples.
I can start, and then Cecilia, if you want to jump in. One thing that comes to mind is, you know, California. I think the whole of the West Coast last year just was enraged in these fires. And one thing that I kept thinking about is in Northern California and the Sierras, we work with the tribe, the Karuk tribe, and have thought a lot about their indigenous practices. And I know this varies from region to region and place to place, and this may or may not apply to Southern Oregon. But really thinking about, you know, the stewards of the land and how they manage the land for such a long time. And when we're thinking about rebuilding communities, how are we really uplifting and centering the knowledge of tribes and tribal nations, because they've held the knowledge of the land for so long. They know what has and has not worked. And what would be, I think that feels like a really important first step in thinking about where are we building community, how are we building community, and how are we building a community that's sustainable? You know, if we are going to build in fire-prone areas, then what are the practices that we need to be putting in place? And how are we, if we're putting, for example, prescribed fire practices in place, how are we protecting the public health or creating a public health protection for people who are doing farm working, who are in rural communities, to make sure that they're protected when we do have you know, a managed burning season, but a season that's not going to, you know, create this catastrophic event. So that's one concrete way I think about it, is, you know, thinking about who has managed the land historically, really bringing them into the conversation, and also who's part of that community. Who are those community workers? Like, are there farm workers are in the area? Like, what are the marginalized populations or populations that are really frontline, that will be impacted, and how can we create a community to support them? And Cecilia,
No, I mean, I think the only other thing that I would add is, I mean, when you're picking up on that notion of who are the other community members that should be engaged, is kind of go deep about that. Think about who are all the folks that have been affected. There's obviously the homeowners that's lost their home, right? But what are the ripple effects of the destruction of a whole city or whole community? Who others' jobs might be affected? What's that ripple effect? And engage them as well. And also think about how can the rebuilding process not just be done in a way that's sustainable from an environmental standpoint, but is there a way we make sure that we have consciousness of maintaining that stewardship of the forest? Those are jobs themselves, right? And who might be in the best position to have those jobs, make a living from them, and actually better sustain the community, both economically as well as environmentally. So the thing about this equity blueprint, it talks about, you know, the questions about who are you engaging and how are you engaging them? It talks about, are you consciously addressing those who are impacted the most when you design a program? These are just kind of simple questions, but ones that if you just consistently ask them of yourselves, it might push you to come to a little bit different ways of approaching designing solutions. Anyway, that's a really good question to ask on how to apply something like this. I would also note data collection is one of the elements that's in here, data collection and use. Who's collecting the data? What's the data that's being collected? What might be data points and others who might not have access to the control of that data might want to see collected? So helping co-design that data collection with affected members of the community can really even change the questions you're asking people and the way you present the data, right? So you want to have the data presented in a way that's accessible, that's meaningful for folks rather than just like an Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah, definitely. So that kind of covers the questions that were in the chat here. So we do have, let's see, about 15 minutes up, maybe about 20 minutes if we want some more time. But I'll just invite anyone who would maybe like to unmute themselves and ask any questions, or also just share any thoughts. So for some of us, this might have been a lot of, kind of a new way of approaching climate change and thinking about these kinds of things. So if you're kind of chewing on that, that's totally fine too. But we'd love to hear from all of you. We'd love to just kind of start a conversation about this in our community and how we can start to all come together as we're rebuilding from the Almeda fire, and also just looking towards the future in terms of adapting to climate change in our community. How can we come together and make sure that climate equity is at the forefront of this conversation?
And don't be shy. You guys asked some great questions, or if you just want to make a statement. The other thing I'll note is, and I might drop it back in the chat box. We have a really cool little glossary at the beginning of the blueprint that defines some terms that you hear thrown around a lot in the media. And so I think one of the most important things when we do this work is make sure that we have the same definition. We're using a word in the same way. It seems so basic, but oftentimes we throw around words and they become trendy and we don't actually define them in a way that we have shared common ground. So we invite you to take a look at that glossary of terms. It's only a couple of pages, but might be helpful. Well, I will ask you guys a question if you don't have a question for me. And that is, what do you see as the biggest challenge you have in achieving climate justice in your region? Anyone? And I know you're not shy. There are PhDs in this call.
I want to lift up something, Lori. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Kathy.
Well, I think oftentimes we don't know how to connect with the people that we'd like to know what they're experiencing and what they're thinking. We just don't have the tools to make those connections. So do you have ideas for us on how to do that?
Yeah, go ahead, Asma, if you want to.
I mean, I think that reaching out, being honest and sincere, that you want to engage and you want to support organizations or people. I think one thing that that has come across in our work is really finding ways to help these organizations build their capacity. So knowing what SOCAN does, if there is a way that SOCAN can help other rural community groups, tribal groups, EJ groups, and sort of that capacity of, we were talking right before about, I think there's like a spin-off or like an offshoot of SOCAN that does some political organizing. Well, are there organizations, are there people out there that could really use that support and would be helpful to have, SOCAN help them do that as like a capacity builder? And that can be one way to like start a relationship and an engagement with an organization or a community.
Yeah, another way to do that is to have an understanding of just ask people about their experiences and what is it they're facing. What are the top 3 things you all are facing in this community? Right? Like a very simple question like that gets people talking about what they're dealing with. What's a day-to-day problem you're dealing with? And that creates common ground. I think what we have to do when we try to connect with communities with whom we are unfamiliar and we don't have a personal relationship, it is so challenging and it's scary, right? We fear rejection a lot. But we have to open our hearts in order to have love brought to us. So we have to do the same things. We have to open ourselves and be vulnerable and say to folks, hey, I'm trying to learn. I might ask you a dumb question, but only because I'm sincerely want to understand. Tell me what's going on. What are you guys facing? What are you afraid of? What are you worried about? I want to see how we can share. I mean, these sound super hokey, Kathy, but I actually think that's the way you make connection in the most basic ways. Anyway, I hope that's helpful.
I'd like to chime in. I'd love to send you guys a link. I think probably a lot of people on this call have seen this film that we screened a couple times in the last 6 months called Other Side of other side of the hill. I always kind of want to say over the hill, but it's other side of the hill. And it's about Eastern Oregon. There's quite a cultural difference, between especially the Portland area and then Eastern Oregon, which is very, very rural and very conservative. So I think that was really the message of that film as well. The film just spotlighted communities in rural Oregon that really are on the front lines of climate change and how they were actually embracing renewable energy as an economic opportunity. But if you talked about climate change overtly, that was like a conversation ender. And so it was really about, okay, how do we just get to know each other as human beings again and just say, share a beer together or be around the barbecue together, which we can't do right now. But I feel like that was what you said is very consistent with the overriding message of that film as well. So that's just kind of an aside, and we'll share that link. But I guess I'd like to bring out that I think, there's been the traditional environmental movement and climate movement over decades that were very white, and very not inclusive, maybe not by design, but by outcome, certainly. And I feel like there has been a growing awareness over the last decade or so of the need to be more inclusive, and the Sunrise Movement and the Green New Deal was the first, I think, major entree to really combining those topics of just transition and equity in climate action. So can you talk about that? Because I think for some people that feels like, oh, well, I'm just speaking like how I perceive it, like that we're burdening. We just really want to get, decarbonization. And now we're layering on all of these other social problems that we know we have in this country. But is that going to compromise our ability to get our climate goals met? Or is it how is it going to help us? Or are we just burdening it too much with too many other ornaments on the tree?
It's a really good question, Lori. And I think about this at the macro political level sometimes, and then I'll bring it down to kind of like the basics. So the macro political level, and so I've been working on environmental issues since like 1989. And I was in the Clinton EPA. I worked on air quality issues there. I've been on the California Coastal Commission. I settled these major Clean Water Act lawsuits at the city of Los Angeles. I've been working on environmental issues for most of my career. At the same time, I've been working on economic development issues, right? It's been this really, I've been in my own little human body trying to find intersectionality, right? Because I think they go together. To me, they're not distinct issues, and I don't believe there's a trade-off. So my macro thing I wanted to say to you is that there have been so many attempts to make a run at climate legislation at the federal level, and they all look the same way. And the green groups got a lot of money in the last go around and weren't successful. So why would we try to do the same thing? Like, we've done this how many times? So something's clearly wrong with the strategy. So I think the idea, you referencing the Sunrise Movement is a really important note. If you're going to radically change the feedstock of an entire economy, that's maybe soon to be the second largest economy, but is the first largest right now. If you're going to do that, you better have a pretty big group of people behind you, because you're taking on the most powerful people in the most powerful country in the world. So some cool, like well-meaning, nice white people are not going to be able to do that by themselves. You are going to need a movement big enough to move the world. And that movement is right there with you, right? Who has suffered from this economy? Who has suffered from the degradation of our economy? Black people, brown people, poor people, women, children. Lots of people are suffering from the problem that you are trying to solve. So go to where they live, understand their issues, build that big tent, because on your own, if you only fought against Goliath with sort of like your next door neighbor, you're not going to win. You need a big, bold tent, because it's that scale of problem that we're dealing with. So I don't think it's a distraction from your climate solution. In fact, it's your only hope for an enduring solution to this climate problem. It is your only hope. I would also throw labor into that, People think about labor as like this biggest impediment, these terrible labor unions who are keeping us from getting climate legislation. You know what? Just as like there's no white monolith, there's no brown monolith, there's no labor monolith either. There is lots of diversity within the labor movement. So the key is to find those cracks, find those folks who share your common ground, who have some interest with you, and work at it and work at it until you're making that wedge bigger and bigger and bigger. Our job as bridge builders is to sort of find others that are like-minded, even on a small issue, create that common ground, create that foundation, and then we bring another one in and another one in, and pretty soon we're bridging this big gap. And then together we start to find the fissures in the machine and we wallop them. We put wedges in those fissures, the wedges of, hey, you're treating working people as badly as you're treating indigenous people. We have common ground, right? The folks that you talked about in Eastern Oregon that are finding common ground around renewable energy. Don't mention climate, fine. I'll speak whatever language you want. I'm going to meet you where you are if I can find a common ground. So I would say it's not a distraction. It is our only way of building the big tent. I have to tell you, since Biden got elected, I can't even believe the stuff that's happening in Washington, D.C. I didn't know if I'd ever see that in my lifetime. Haven't been through this a few times. But the reason he's able to pull this off is because he's found the common ground between working people, Black and brown folks, poor folks. You know, there is this big mass of us. If we all come together, those of us who don't like what we see, we are more than the majority, way more than the majority. So anyway, I went off a little bit, Lori, but I feel so strongly about this, you know, and particularly in communities like yours. Thank you for inviting us. There's like no reason why you would need to talk to us, right? But thank you for inviting us because we are your allies and we work all over the country. We have conversations with people who look a lot like you in a lot of different ways. And for us, we can always find common ground. We can always find common ground. So just let us find it. Let us just talk enough, tell enough stories, and we will find commonality in fighting and saving our planet.
Thank you. Yeah. Wow. I feel so inspired. That's really great.
So
Does anybody else? I think we have about 5 more minutes. If anybody else wants to chime in during the conversation or ask a question.
Coming from a scientific background, I will have to confess, I have always felt uncomfortable with stories. And yet I totally appreciate the point that you are making, Cecilia, that we've been trying it this way for decades and look where it's got us. I totally appreciate that. So what I'm sitting here trying to do is just think, what kind of a story can I take out to folks in the rural Oregon? And I would have thought that wildfire would be a perfect story. I would have thought that the constant dying of Douglas firs throughout Southern Oregon, of trees throughout California and Oregon, would be a perfect story to get people to think about what's happening and why. And yet, here we are in this wildfire furnace, and folks are constantly blaming something else. So I'm trying to figure out how to get that story tied to what's driving it.
Well, it all depends on what you're trying to get them to do, right, Alan? So some of this is, if you describe something that they've experienced, that they know to be true, and then you make another little connection and another link and another link, you can get them there. It's hard for you to go to, hey, we have this massive fires, it's all climate change, we got to like shift off from this, we got to get rid of gas, we got to get rid of it. It's hard for people to go that far. But if you could say, gosh, you know, there's been a lot more fires than there used to be, don't you think? Haven't there been, and you know what? I've got the data to prove it. I thought so too. And here's what the data says. What has changed? What has changed? Whether you think it's man-made or not, it's changing. So what can we do to deal with that? What can we do to keep this place inhabitable for our kids and grandkids, right? I don't know, I hear what you're saying, like, you're not going to believe this, but I actually hate telling stories too. I'm not a great storyteller. I know the power of them. I worked for an organization for a little while called Green for All. And Van Jones founded it, but by the time I got there, he was long gone and he was in the White House. But I remember I knew him when I was in law school, and he also graduated from my same law school. And he would talk about the power of telling stories. I hate telling stories about myself. It makes me uncomfortable, right? So I won't tell a story about myself, but I'll tell a story about somebody else's experience, because it still has an emotional impact. I mean, I've got to get past my own things about revealing so much about myself, but I saw the power of storytelling. And I think we just need to get ourselves a little out of our comfort zone and take our assets. And yours is your big brain and your mastery of the data. You can tell a story about the data, Alan. I know you can, that can connect with people. But it may not be the grand, epic story you want to tell. You want them to see the light of day. They just need to have a little bit of connection, just a little bit farther than they are today. And you've made progress. You know what I mean? Like you may not be able to get them to accept everything you're saying. You just need to take them a little farther down the line than they were before they met you. That's how I always look at it. Just a little bit more. I've pushed you a little bit farther. And that's an accomplishment. So Asma and I were talking about, what is this all about? Social movements and big transformations in economies and society, you know where they start? They start in personal transformation of individuals. It's a bunch of individuals, one by one, personally transformed and personally changed. What they believed, what they thought, what they felt, the connection they felt. It all starts with an individual. So if you have a conversation with somebody and you convince them that something's not quite right about why all these Douglas firs are dying, that's not just natural, that something weird's going on, and you're able to use your data to show them that it's something weird's going on, that's part of their personal transformation journey. So small steps, a lot of small steps, a lot of individual transformations make for social transformation. It's the only way social movements work, actually. John Holm has a question.
Actually, I just want to add on, as someone who ran for Congress last year, telling the art of the story, since Alan's having a little problem with it, doesn't even have to be about the Douglas firs. You can use a simile that matches something to it, so that you're talking about something that resembles what you want to talk about for the forest, so that people can have a better understanding of it. Because that's what I use all the time when I'm talking about different things, to resemble things for Congress that we want to do, so that people have a better understanding of something you want to do. Because when I'm talking about climate, I don't use the word climate. I try to use moving Oregon into the 21st century, because climate is a buzzword, and Republicans love to use that as a buzzword against us. So I prefer to go into the 21st century instead, so I avoid using it as a buzzword. Does that help you, Alan?
Now we got people going. Virginia Camberos raised her hand.
Hi, everyone. Virginia Camberos. I'm the regional director for Unite Oregon. And I have to say, within my community as a POC person, I think that, and POC, person of color, is that, storytelling is one of the things that, you have to get people to listen to your heart, right? Because numbers can be all over, but when people are telling their stories, especially for the folks that are out on the fields that are actually doing the work, our forest workers, our agricultural workers, those stories being told, because these are the people that are being impacted by climate change. So I have to say that I've just started a brand new committee. It's a climate justice committee, with a group of 8, very passionate, people that have either worked in the forest or worked in the agricultural business, and now they're doing either landscaping or construction, because they said, working out in the fields was very, detrimental, not only, for myself and my health, but, to my family. So I think that, storytelling is one of the best things that, you can do, because it tells, it relates to what people are actually going through, what they're feeling and what they're experiencing. I mean, I can't speak for those people that work out in the fields, because I've never worked out in the fields, but I can just imagine, when they tell me, their stories about how the heat, is so intense, but they have no other freaking choice but to do that job, because that's all they can do. So I think that that's very important, that, that we tell our story, of what we're experiencing. And I mean, yes, we need numbers and we need, all this other data. I get it. But at the same time, let's connect together as a community. Like, I see all these faces here today, and I'm wondering, where are all the other brown faces? Why are we not here? Why are we not, being vocal and being, present about the movement, and how do we help each other to make a change, for climate, that's important for all of us. Thank you.
Virginia, thank you so much for chiming in there. And I hope that that's the beginning of some added connections.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I love the energy and the passion that I can see getting going. So I want to thank Cecilia and Asma for getting us kind of thinking out of the box, and just, about the human aspect, I think, of where we are. So I think this is a perfect launch for our series. Just to start that thinking process. And I appreciate everyone. I want to give Kathy and Alan a few minutes to wrap up. We're kind of pushing them right up against the top of the hour to just tell us about other things. But thank you, everyone. Give a round of applause.
Thank you again for having us. We really enjoyed it. And Alan and Kathy, we will give you your time back.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, I really appreciate what you've said. It kind of pushes me in a direction that I've been wanting to go in with some ideas. And Virginia, thank you for being here. I think that we can make some connections and start doing some of these things. My task, and I'll do it quickly, is to share with you some things that SOCAN is doing. Our hope is that you'll decide you want to join us. You can join us for an event, or you can join us for longer term, whatever works for you. Everything I'm going to share is on our website, socan.eco/events. And so as I go through things quickly, you can go there and get the details. We've recently reorganized a little bit. We have a board of directors and a leadership circle, and we've created 5 program areas. And we've done things in these areas before, but just kind of organizing things a little better with then our projects within each of those programs. So the program areas we're working in are education, government, natural resources, transportation, and community engagement. And so what I want to do is just share a few things in each of those areas. Within our education program, we have our Master Climate Protector, and many of the people here have participated in that. It's a 10-week course, and right now we're doing the 2021 version, which will end on April 12th. The next course will be next February, and right now we're on Zoom, but we're hoping that we will be back to meeting together face-to-face, so we can have more of those conversations and interactions. Within the government program, we have a federal and state project, and that group will have a meeting on Monday, April 12th at 2 o'clock. Now on all of these, if you go to socan.eco, look at the date, you'll find the details for the Zoom meetings and who to contact if you're interested. Also within the government program is the city and county project, and their next meeting is Thursday, April 15th at 1 o'clock. We have an Ashland Climate Action Project, And this focuses on things in Ashland. If you are interested in being on the email for updates and information about programs, send an email to Lori@socan.eco to get more information about that project. Within natural resources, we have a forest and fire project, and that group will meet again on Wednesday, April 21st at 2:30. And then going to the community engagement program, we have a group in Brookings Harbor on the coast, and they have monthly meetings. Their next meeting is Wednesday, April 21st at 5:30. These are all Zoom meetings, so we can participate in them quite easily. This next discussion will be about recycling in Curry County and beyond, an important issue to a lot of people. We are going to participate in Rogue Valley Earth Day. It's going to be a little different this year. There's not going to be an event at Science Works, but what's going to happen is groups like us are going to create EcoQuest adventures. And so we have submitted an adventure, and hopefully it'll be approved. These will happen between April 22nd and 25th. They're either virtual or outdoors, so people even who don't live in Ashland can participate in them. So SOCAN is a sustainable supporter of Rogue Valley Earth Day, and we really want to support them in their efforts to do things a little differently this year. Another project under the community engagement is Sustaining Climate Activists, and this is to support people who are dealing with issues with climate change. Our facilitators are Liz Olson and Ken Devaney, who are both here tonight. This meets monthly. The next meeting is Saturday, April 24th. Our next monthly meeting in April, always the last Tuesday of the month, so Tuesday, April 27th. We're going to focus on climate action in Oregon, legislative and executive order 2004. We're going to have updates on those things that are happening at the state level. Jeff Golden, our senator from the southern part, will be part of that conversation. And if her schedule allows, Pam Marsh plans to also join us. We have a project called Businesses Taking Action. These are businesses that are doing things for environmental sustainability, but also in the social justice arena. And a business can complete our survey, then we post them on the website so that everybody can see who's willing to take the time and energy to do this. But also, if you know a business who might be interested, contact them, and on the page for Businesses Taking Action, there's a link to a form you can print that'll give them some basic information. Other projects that don't have current meetings, in the education program, we have Climate in the Classroom presentations in the Oregon legislative and congressional districts. In the transportation program, we have transit equity, natural resources. In addition to what I showed you, groups that are meeting, there's also water management and conservation and offshore wind. And then in community engagement, there's a group, fire recovery group, that's working with other groups that are looking at issues people who experience the fire are dealing with, and trying to help put in an awareness of climate change and what can be done to consider that as well. And then also the Media Corps that helps write letters and get attention towards the climate change issues. So this is other groups. These are groups in the area that we like to support. There are Living Soil Awards. If you are aware of the regenerative agriculture movement, these are farmers who are doing things, and the awards are to recognize them. I believe this is the first time they've done this, sponsored by Friends of Family Farmers, Oregon Pasture Network, and Cultivate Oregon. This one, if you want more information, you need to go to SOCAN's Facebook page and the events, and there's a link there. for more information. ROCPAC, Rural Oregon Climate Political Action Committee, is a voice for our concerns with climate change across rural Oregon, and Hogan Shiro is the contact for that. So I would like to say a special thank you to our guests this evening, Asma and Cecilia. We really have wanted to do this for a long time, and as Lori mentioned, start a series of conversations about this issue, and this has been an excellent start. Thank you so much for being here. And thanks to Lori for all the work and setting things up and meetings and getting all the arrangements made, and to Ellie for helping us. And thanks to all of you for being here tonight, because this is really important for us to start taking more action. We need to elevate social justice in our activism, and that's going to take you thinking about what you can do and joining activities that are going to help us move forward in this arena. After the program, I'll send an email with a survey, and it's really helpful if you would take just a couple minutes to fill that out. Give us some feedback about this session. Our website is socan.eco. If you have questions, info@socan.eco. And if you're able to help support us financially, we really appreciate that, as well as other things people are doing. So I would like to thank you so much. We're going to stop the recording, and if anybody wants to stay around and do any more talking questions, we'll be here for a while. But thank you so much for coming this evening and joining us.